Hey guys, this is Austin. Computers have been getting smaller and smaller ever since the days of mainframes. Now it just makes sense, right? As technology advances, you want to put it into more and more portable form factors. So when NVIDIA reached out and wanted to sponsor a video on the brand new Acer Predator Triton 500, it felt like the perfect time to ask, are laptops killing desktops? And yeah, that's a big question. At only 18 millimeters thick and just over 2 kilos in weight, this is a great example of how a laptop like this could not have existed even a couple years ago. The entire chassis is made of metal and it has a narrow bezel display, which is not only bright and fairly vibrant, but importantly it does have a full 144 Hz refresh rate, over double what you would find on most other non-gaming laptops these days. Now this version of the Triton does have an RTX 2060 inside, so it will support G-Sync via an external display, but if you were able to upgrade this to the 2080 version of the Triton, it has G-Sync on the internal display, which keeps things looking even smoother. On board, you also have Killer Doubleshot Pro. Essentially, this can take advantage of both Ethernet and Wi-Fi at the same time to route your traffic through whichever is faster. Something that's hard to get across is just the level of polish, fit, and finish with this laptop. I mean, not only does it look clean with all the blue lighting, although of course it is RGB, but on top of that, you've got the little things which are absolutely nailed. This is one of the best touchpads I've ever used on any Windows laptop. The keyboard is also great, and that screen really does sell the idea that this is a super fast gaming laptop, even when you're not even gaming, right? I mean, stuff like web browsing is still much smoother than on pretty much any other laptop, and that is a big plus. So if we get back to the idea that laptops are coming close to replacing desktops, one of the very first things you have to acknowledge is that laptops have a lot less space to deal with, but it also fits in your backpack, so, you know, there's that. This might sound obvious, but there are some major advantages going with a desktop tower. So one of the big ones is on the power side of things. So not only does a desktop not have to worry about things like battery life, as long as you've got mom paying the electricity bill, you're totally fine. One of the bigger issues is the actual cooling aspect of things. As you can see with a tower like this, you can load it up with fans, RGBs, liquid cooling, all of that is no problem. So things can be run at much higher clock speeds. It's just really not a big issue. But when you come over to a laptop, which is less than an inch thin, certain sacrifices have to be made. But you know what? Those sacrifices are getting smaller and smaller every year. This delivers a very similar level of performance to this giant tower right in front of me. If we come back to the Triton 500, you'll see that a large part of this design is entirely dedicated to keeping the laptop cool. Now that makes sense, right? With a 2060 inside, this can put off over 100 watts of heat just from the GPU alone. So because they have all these different heat sinks as well as the metal AeroBlade fans to keep all of that heat moving, it means that there's actually very little throttling even though we are gaming on such a thin and light laptop. A big part of this is thanks to the software. So if you hit the Predator Sense button, which is very helpfully labeled right here, you have full control over a lot of things, including the fans. So by default, this guy actually runs with the fans all disabled, but as soon as you start needing any kind of extra power, they will start to kick up. Now for gaming, it's actually fairly quiet. One of the cool parts is if I come over to the fan control side and hit the turbo button, you'll see that this thing can really crank up. So if you have headphones on, you don't care about a little bit of noise, you can get significantly better performance out of the Predator. And the best part is, as soon as you're done gaming, you can just hit the turbo button and it will bring the clock speeds back down to normal, and importantly, those fans will kick right back off. It actually really is nice to have the performance when you need it, or the silence when you want it. And I always want the silence. I'll give up a few frames to have a much quieter laptop. I feel like the more videos we do like this, the more I just out myself as someone who's like an old man and like, oh, I don't know, I don't care, I just want it to be quiet. And I want it to work well. Right now, there are over 1 billion PC gamers in the world. I think it's a pretty safe bet to assume that a lot of those gamers are using desktops right now, but just look at the overall trends, right? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that pretty much everyone had a desktop in their homes. Now, laptops have largely replaced them for pretty much anything besides gaming tasks. Well, I think given how far gaming laptops have come, it's only a matter of time before gaming is also moving more and more to the laptop side of things. But my real question is exactly how close can a laptop get to a full gaming desktop? So we have come to GDC here in San Francisco, which is the mecca of all things gaming and tech related, to talk just a little bit more about why the laptop actually makes so much sense in 2019. Also, we were looking for an excuse to come to GDC. Now if you take a look inside the Triton, you'll see the secret sauce that makes all of this work. The highly optimized CPU and GPU to really elevate laptops to an entirely different level. First off, we have the CPU. This is the Intel Core i7-8750H, which is a full 6-core processor that can clock up over 4 GHz when it's boosting. Now it's easy to forget that for a very long time, we were capped at around 4 cores, not only on the desktop side, but also the laptop side. The idea that we can get 6 cores in something that's this thin and light is something that's easy to take for granted, but it is a big deal. You can do more than just gaming on something like this with that much power. Stuff like streaming, video editing, 3D rendering, all that stuff is totally possible. Inside, essentially what you're getting is a more power efficient version of the 8th gen Core desktop processors. Now, there's a lot of advantages to this. Not only is it a very similar layout, but because we're dealing with about less than half the power, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 watts versus 90 plus on the desktop side, it means that while you're giving up a little bit of performance, that same basic core architecture is all here, and as long as you have the cooling to back it up, which the Triton definitely does, you can actually still keep those fairly high boost clocks even with all 6 cores loaded. Now, the laws of physics do mean that because we have less than an inch thick laptop, it's never going to have quite that same level of performance as the desktop, but it kind of doesn't need to. As long as you're getting close enough and you still deliver the portability, I think it's a trade-off a lot of people are happy to make. Don't expect this trend to go anywhere either. As laptops and desktops share more and more of the same components, it is very likely, if the rumors are true, that we will see laptops with 8-core CPUs before too much longer, which, I mean, to be fair, do you need 8 cores in a CPU of a laptop? Probably not. Do you want one? I do. Maybe the more interesting comparison is on the graphics side. Now, for years, NVIDIA made a separate version of all of their graphics cards. They would make the desktop version and then a mobile. However, for the last couple years, they've straight up just made one which works across the board. Now, no, it's not quite that simple. NVIDIA and their OEM partners such as Acer do a lot of work to make sure that a full RTX card can fit in a thin and light chassis like this. But you might be surprised at just how close the graphics card in this laptop is compared to a much thicker and much more expensive gaming PC. What this means is that you're getting all the performance you would expect out of an RTX graphics card. Not only the power to play a lot of games on ultra settings at high frame rates, but you also get some of the cool bells and whistles, including ray tracing, which we are just very conveniently standing in front of a giant booth for. Really what this means is that the days of waiting for the cool bells and whistles from the desktop to come down to the laptops are over. We really have basically hit feature parity, and typically speaking, when something comes out for the desktop side of things, it's gonna come out for the laptop side very quickly, and generally speaking, you're really not going to be losing a lot in that process. Now, this is something that's easy to kind of take for granted, right? Of course, laptops should be the same, but again, this is a much thinner, much lighter, and much more difficult thing to engineer. It's easy to forget that not that long ago, there was a massive penalty to gaming on a laptop. You had to deal with far inferior specs both on the CPU and on the GPU side, and a lot of times you didn't even have those same level of features. I mean, I can imagine if ray tracing came out 5 years ago, you would not have been able to play it on a laptop. While it's great to have that same level of performance with the 2060 inside the Triton as you would get in a desktop, you also have other options as you go higher up in the product stack. So specifically on the Acer side, if you upgrade this Triton with a RTX 2080, you then get a Max-Q design. Now, the Max-Q design is actually not that different than what Intel does on their high-end mobile CPUs. So they basically start from the same building block. In this case, the RTX 2080, it's the same GPU across the laptop as well as the desktop. Now, there are some slight differences. Usually the Max-Q design is a little bit more highly bent, so it's a little bit more power efficient just naturally. But on top of that, they do a much better job of bringing down the power to keep that level of performance as high as possible. So for context, typically speaking, an RTX 2080 has a roughly 220 watt TDP. Now, on the laptop side, it's usually about half of that, around 100 to 120 watts. But even though it's using half the power, oftentimes you're getting anywhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of that same level of performance. Now, if you excuse all the nerd talk for a second, what this means is that laptops and desktops are so similar at this point. It really is just a scaled up version of what you're finding on the laptop side. You go grab a desktop with some giant cooler and a ton of heat sinks. Now, of course, there's going to be the laws of physics, which mean that laptops can never quite match that level of performance. When you're talking about 70, 80% that same level in something that's less than an inch thick that you can fit in your backpack and take with you all day, I think that's a super compelling value proposition. I think a lot of people would prefer to have one single system. This sure might not be 100% as powerful as the most crazy thing out there, but can do basically everything very well. Plenty of battery life. Most importantly, you can take it with you all day. Something that's not really going to happen anytime soon with the desktop.